Record.
Cool. Okay, guys. Well, yeah, good afternoon. Thanks for joining. So welcome to Southwest STEM Fest event. So yeah, I'm Richard Joyce. I'm one of the co-founders here at EVONA Space Recruitment. We're based in central Bristol. There's 27 of us now, and we recruit for the global space sector. So Catherine, if you want to go to the next slide, if that's okay. Thank you. So who are we? So as I mentioned, EVONA, a global space sector recruitment firm, essentially. So that's pretty much everything encapsulated within space, all upstream and downstream space applications. So the easiest ways to break that down, upstream is basically hiring and helping people find people that design, build, test, develop anything that goes into space. So typically this is associated with hardware engineers, mechanical engineers, people that are hands-on designing, building things. So space-wise, it could be a spacecraft, it could be a satellite, it could be a propulsion system for a rocket. And then downstream, if you think about it from things like data you get for your mobile phone, Wi-Fi, that's everything downstream. So the data that we actually get back from the satellites in space. We've been going for, well, it'll be our third birthday on the 1st of July. So we've been going 3 years. In terms of the name, EVONA, it comes from Evo, evolution of people, and owner, people. So that's how we came up with the name to go to EVONA. So to the next slide. So yeah, our mission, obviously, first and foremost, as mentioned, we are a recruitment company. That's what we do. That's our forte. That's what we're known for. But it goes beyond that. That's why we're all passionate STEM ambassadors. That's why we do what we do these events. Is we're trying to our sort of end goal here is to demystify the space sector. So what we mean by that is that, as it says there, it's not a rocket science. It's one of the fastest growing industries and more than likely be the first $1 trillion industry globally. And we're trying to make it accessible for everyone. I'm sure you guys as well. The first thing you probably think about when you think space, as a lot of people do, is astronauts, which, is quite natural. But we're trying to break the mold and actually encourage guys like yourself, in school, college, university, but also people that are actually, working, in industry outside of space. Actually, space is accessible for everybody. You don't need to be a PhD rocket scientist to get into space. You can find a calling, you can find a career in space, without knowing a lot about it at first. So we're trying to encourage the younger generation and people outside of the sector to say, look, this is accessible. You can be an engineer, you can be a software developer, you can be a lawyer, you can be a sales executive, you could be a marketing specialist. It doesn't matter. The space is it's so fast growing now, and it used to be what we call old space, which it was all government money. It was all very slow. So in the UK you'd have the UK and the European Space Agency, and then the US. I'm sure you've all heard of NASA at some point, and that was it. We're now going through a bit of a transition that has been kind of kicked off by, and I'll talk about this a bit more as the presentation develops, but you probably would have heard at some point about a company called SpaceX by Elon Musk. And these kind of what we call as new space or commercial space companies are really sort of driving change in the industry and creating jobs for everybody in the space sector. And the kind of traditional and conventional government approach, money and all that kind of stuff that would go into these projects to send people and rockets and satellites into space is kind of changing now to more commercial space. And these big contracts are being awarded to the smaller sort of startup companies as well. So there's so much opportunity globally for the space sector now. Obviously, US predominantly has most of the market cap. I think it's around 56% of the entire space market, which is quite extraordinary. But I mean, there's opportunities everywhere. The UK Space Agency is growing. It's got a hell of a lot of press with Virgin Galactic and the spaceport down at Cornwall as well. So I'll go on a bit more. If we go on to the next slide, and I'll touch on those points a bit more. So this is kind of encapsulating the stuff that I just went through, and this is just kind of making it really easy and straightforward for you guys, just to kind of, you know, break it down so it doesn't overcomplicate things. And that's the beauty of it. You know, space doesn't need to be rocket science. It doesn't need to be over complicated. And like I mentioned there, you know, the upstream is the manufacturing, the operation side that we just spoke about on the last slide, where it's the actual building of stuff, you know, physical hardware, the bits and pieces that go into rockets, you know, manned spacecraft, etc. And the downstream is the technology side. You do have different kind of industries that feed into those. Upstream and downstream is like the two big broad segments, and the four areas around that are what feed into it. So the commercial users, you know, these are people that are looking at, you know, essentially improving Earth, most of them, you know, environmental services, energy, minerals, agricultural, maritime. So you can see already, this is what we're talking about when there's all these different areas and spin-offs of space, and how it all intertwines, it all connects. You know, in the next 10 years, most companies will be known as space companies. I mean, Uber, I'm sure everybody's heard of Uber. Uber technically is a space company, because that is, you know, software and data that we're getting from satellites that are in space. So, you know, sooner or later in the future, everybody will be using at some point, in some way, some sort of space application. You know, there's stuff there around that you would have seen. So if you look at the, excuse me, the consumer users, satellite TV, I'm sure you all, you know, watch satellite TV, GPS in your cars, or mums and dads' cars, or friends' cars, you know, public users. So this weather stuff, and if you look at defense and national security, that is, you know, all about improving Earth. So you would have seen stuff on, I guess, Netflix, on telly about, you know, our agriculture, and, you know, a lot of the land and the sea is potentially dying. You know, this is about observing that stuff, climate change, weather change, and how we can improve Earth from space. So it's really, really interesting. So hopefully that gives you guys a bit of a breakdown on the space sector. Go to the next slide. So where in the world? So yeah, again, this kind of ties in what I said, most of the stuff, like, yeah, half the world. So like I say, it's just over 50%. I think off the top of my head, it's somewhere between 53 and 56% of the world space companies are in the United States. So as we know, the US is, you know, humongous in comparison to us guys over in the UK, but they've got the second amount of largest companies. You know, we kind of probably don't get as much coverage as we should do, really, because even though we've only got second amount of companies, it's still in contrast quite small, but we're getting there. You know, we've got Airbus Defence and Space, and, you know, Lockheed and Airbus, and all the big guys that you probably would have heard of at some point. But there is, you know, this, what I spoke about a couple of slides ago, around this kind of new, you know, commercial space. There is a lot of that going on in the UK as well, and it's good to see that the funding from the UK Space Agency, European Space Agency, are starting to go to a lot of more of these kind of newer startup companies that are looking at amazing different applications in space. So we go to the next slide. So this is, yeah, this is tying in with the government stuff. Probably jumped the gun a bit, but this is the government stuff that we discussed on the first slide. So like I say, their focal point is to grow the space programs and ensure the continued investment. But the good thing about these, obviously we always need these, and there's 72 of these across the world, but these are the three that you'll hear of the most. They're the most kind of buoyant in the sector. Everybody knows these three. They're the big three, the titans of the kind of the government space agencies. And they're essentially the ones where they kind of delegate and decide where the kind of investment in these space programs go to. And like I said, if we wind back, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, these guys would have the investment. They'd look at the money pot and say, right, where should we invest the money, the time, the resource to make sure that these space programs get delivered and they're successful, and we can actually grow these applications. And traditionally, as I mentioned, these, NASA would look at it and go, right, we're going to give that to Lockheed and Boeing, UK Space Agency, Airbus Defence and Space. ESA would go to, the big guys over there. So that probably, again, be their Airbus Defence and Space, and then like OHB and these big companies. But this is kind of where the shift is now coming, and it's really exciting to see. And it's kind of almost stemmed from SpaceX. He's kind of triggered it all in everyone, I think, to say, these other companies, there's so much talent out there that are building these companies and doing it at a lesser cost. They're doing it quicker, more affordably, and doing it in different ways. So it's great to see that now there's such a sort of a global collaboration outside of just government bodies. So yeah, these are space companies you might know. So as mentioned, SpaceX I've mentioned a few times. Virgin Galactic, I'm sure, hopefully, at some point you guys would have heard of Richard Branson. Obviously started and was famous for Virgin Records, and then did Virgin Aeroplanes, which some of you may have even been on at some point, go on holiday over to America. Now I have. And then he started Virgin Galactic. So it's now estimated at 5.1 billion, which is absolutely staggering. But these guys, they're utilizing their platform, their framework, the success they've had in the business world to try, and they've all got the same end goal in mind. They're all doing sort of different things, and their space companies do different things, but it's all about the betterment of humanity. And that's why I love the space sector, and that's why we're also passionate here about the space sector, is because we get to kind of work with these types of companies on a daily basis, help them grow, help them with their hiring strategy, and help them identify these people globally to come and work on this groundbreaking, world-changing, literally stuff, engineering applications and technology. So Virgin, like, you've got Blue Origin, obviously Jeff Bezos, I'm sure, hopefully everyone knows, he owns Amazon, one of the biggest e-commerce site and platform in the world, really. I mean, they're just taking over everything, aren't they? So, I mean, if you look at their estimation, 185 billion. So, these are crazy numbers. And if you guys would have watched the news over the last couple of days, he's actually going to be going up into space himself with his brother and a member of the general public, who I was actually reading today. There was a bid for it, so it was going to be Jeff Bezos, his brother, who's his longtime business partner, and they had like a bidding thing. I'm pretty sure that the guy that bid for it won. It was 28 million. He won the bid. So someone has paid $28 million to go to space with Jeff Bezos and his brother. I'm pretty sure that's either this week or next. It might even be on the week. I need to double check the dates, but they're going in the Blue Origin spacecraft, and they're going to space. So that'll be amazing to watch that all unfold on live TV. So make sure you guys tune in for that if you have the opportunity. And also SpaceX is kind of, for me, that's where it all started. This kind of new, as they call it, space race was kind of, started by Elon Musk, South African guy, very, very clever, started PayPal. So some of you may have used PayPal on eBay or something. He started that after he left university. He started Tesla, the electric car brand, and now SpaceX. So, and then they're kind of like they were the pioneers, they were the kind of leaders in like the kind of, if you want to call it, the new school. But then the amount, there's literally thousands of companies now that have kind of like, not offshoots of these companies, but they're kind of like, they're all like the up and coming Virgin Galactics. They're the up and coming Blue Origins and SpaceXs. So it's really exciting to see that develop globally. Yeah, so they're, in terms of what they're doing, so some of this stuff, and it blows my mind almost on a weekly basis. Clients that we work with now, new clients that we sign up, clients that we've worked with and placed with around the world. 80% of our business that we do is in the US, just for the obvious reason I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, is that over half the market cap is in the US. So it's hard to ignore. You're just kind of naturally attracted to that area because that's where it's all happening. But there are some amazing things happening around the world. But these are just to give you just some examples of what some of these companies are doing, which is incredible. So Astroscale. So again, you guys may have heard of it, you may not have done, but there is a bit of an ongoing problem at the moment where we're obviously trying to tackle the problems here on Earth first and foremost with the pollution in the sea, and you know, rubbish on beaches and all that kind of stuff. But there's actually the same problem up in space, believe it or not. So there is a massive, you know, junkyard, whatever you want to call it, debris in space. So there's just a big kind of orbit of what we call space junk, just flying around us, just constantly flying around the world. Some of them are so far away that hopefully they'll never reach us, but some of them are, you know, low Earth satellites, LEO satellites, so that they're not that far away from Earth. So if one of those just decided just to kind of drop out the sky, unfortunately, some of them are really big, you know, and when I say space junk, these are things that have kind of broken away from the International Space Station. Most of it is things that have been launched into space. They have quite a short shelf life, so it's like battery life, if you want to call it that, these satellites, and they die. They go up there, they serve a purpose, they die out, like most devices, like most systems do. They just cut out, they lose power. So they're just floating around up in the upper atmosphere. And you know, now companies are taking a shift to kind of make these satellites really small. Like some of these satellites honestly could be the size of a mouse, the size of a phone. But going back 10 years, even 5 years, you know, some of these satellites could be like as big as a car. So you think of the impact if one of those fell out of the upper atmosphere, crashed down to Earth, you know, the force behind that by the time it hits Earth could cause some serious damage. So there's been some situation where there've been sort of near collisions. But what Astroscale are trying to do is clear it all, get rid of all this rubbish. So they've actually created a device which is almost like, if you want to look at it, it's like a space harpoon. Okay, so they'll launch a spacecraft into space. It will eject this huge harpoon, and this huge harpoon will release a gigantic kind of netting system, and then it will orbit the Earth. And this netting system goes around Earth, and it just wraps this net all around the junk. It then contracts it, so it goes back inside like that, and then it comes back down to Earth. And whilst it's in the net, the force and the speed of that harpoon coming back down to Earth, it all burns up in the atmosphere. So they're trying to eliminate the risk of it just, you know, dropping out of the sky and coming down to Earth. Trust me, so yeah, electric space propulsion systems. So propulsion systems just used to be mainly sort of chemical and that was it. But now people are starting to apply the same sort of principles, if you like, in space applications. They are here on Earth with electric cars. They're trying to do electric propulsion systems, electric rocket systems. So that's super cool. And iSpace there, so micro robots to find resources. So that is again, a lot of these are upstream stuff that we spoke about. So putting stuff into space, but it's slightly different from the Earth observation guys that are kind of, you know, putting satellite imagery on our planet to look at agricultural, improving our land, weather conditions, our sea and all that, sea level, all that kind of stuff. These guys are trying to do that from actually sending micro robots out into space to search, you know, Mars and different habitats to see if they can bring some resources with them back that we could use here on Earth and improve Earth. So I won't go through all of these, but I think the final one is relativity. Relativity, I'd probably say, out of all these kind of new commercial space guys that I was talking to you about that are kind of, you know, have been kind of born from looking at the SpaceX's, the Blue Origins, the Virgin Galactics, they're really ahead of everyone else in terms of funding, growth, and everything else. And they're printing 3D rockets for space missions, which is pretty incredible, really. I mean, to think how much 3D printing technology has evolved to a point of, you know, it's gone from 3D printing like a phone or something to be able to 3D print an entire rocket to go into space is amazing. So go on to the next slide. So careers in the space sector, and this is kind of stemming back to what I said at the beginning about, you know, opening your minds and realizing that actually it's not just all about engineering and technology. You know, it's not all about, you know, can you design or build something that goes up into space, or actually can you write software or write code for data that comes back down from space. There is so much opportunity now. And I know this kind of stuff here is very, very technical, but, you know, as engineers, as IT, but the non-technical stuff is, you know, similar to what we said. So it could be public relations, it could be sales, business strategy, insurance, law. anything. And like I say, this is kind of the way the world is going now. The US kind of started off, it's everywhere now. It's in the UK, it's in Europe, it's in China, it's in Israel, it's all around the world. And it's making it accessible to everybody, whether you're an engineer or a software developer or a scientist, or even something that's not technical. There's always going to be an opportunity for you in the space sector. Okay, so ways to get into space. So STEM science, so these are kind of the, the conventional obvious paths to get into it. These are giving you a sort of a breakdown of what you would need to contribute, what you would need to achieve at GCSE, A-level and degree. And that's just kind of giving you 3 different sort of areas of what we just discussed. If you look at space systems, like the technical, the upstream side, the astrobiologist is like the scientist, and space law is something that's non-technical outside of that stuff. That's the kind of stuff that you need to be sort of thinking about and considering. But even if space is something you've never even thought about before, really, but you kind of have, and some of you might not even have your career path in mind right now, and that's fine. It took me ages to realize what I wanted to do and what I was good at and stuff. So that's fine. But it's just opening your minds now and broadening your horizons, that regardless of what you want to do, it might not be any of these things, but regardless of what you want to do, more than likely there will be an opportunity, there'll be a space for you in space. So these are all the different sort of organizations, if you like, that sort of promote similar things to what we're doing, around STEM and trying to demystify the space sector. There's, internships, apprenticeships, space organizations, and there's, competitions and hackathons. I think the hackathon stuff that's more sort of down track if that's something you're doing specifically around software and things like that. But there are so many organizations out there, and I'll go into a bit more of this stuff because I've got some questions from you guys as well, which will fit into all of this, which I can go on in a bit more detail. But there's the big companies there, the obvious ones there, Airbus and Rolls-Royce. I'm sure everyone's heard of those guys. But Catapult, they're up in Oxford. It's a great centre for promoting UK students into space and exploration and the development of space. So these are places, these are people, these organisations you want to look at and identify. And like I said, I'll go into that in a bit more detail in a minute when we get to the questions. So these are all the sort of the recent growth areas in new space, the commercial space sector that we've been sort of talking about throughout this presentation. So the Earth observation stuff is what we've been talking about improving our planet. Exploration is more the sort of going out to space, so the upstream, and exploring, asteroids and alternative planets, different habitats, going to Mars and trying to find minerals and resources and materials that we could use to help improve our Earth. Satellite manufacturing, so that is just simply the build of satellites to actually get them into space. Medicine is an interesting one, very, very sort of technical, but again, kind of ties in the exploration piece around finding alternatives to improve medicine. Comms navigation, food nutrition. So this is, I won't go for all this stuff. You can see it there, but as you can see, there is most areas you can think of, in industry and career can be adapted to space, and they're all growth areas. And these are just the hot markets right now. These are just the kind of, the high growth areas in new space. There's a whole bunch of other ones that aren't mentioned here as well. So something to consider there. So stories from space. So yeah, this is just to kind of give you guys a bit of an overview and just kind of hammer home the common theme throughout this whole presentation really is that if you look at those different areas around the world, it's different countries, different cultures, different religions, different professions that have all managed to secure themselves a career in the space sector. So, I mean, you can see everything there from, a welder, a builder, a doctor. There is an actual astronaut in there as well, but no matter what you want to do, there will be some opportunity for you to apply that to the space ecosystem globally. So Q&A. So I've got some questions here. So Catherine, Rona, feel free to sort of jump in, but if I can just sort of go through the questions that you guys have sent through to me. I think there's about 3 or 4.
Yeah.
So cool. So first question I've got here. So I'm hoping to study languages after my A-levels. What jobs do you think there would be in space for me with a language degree? So with that, I think automatically, I think the assumption would probably go to being a translator, but actually outside of that, you could do most things outside of a non-technical area that would require a degree in that particular engineering or technology field. So if language is something you're going to be doing as a degree and passionate about, the things that you want to be looking at is sales and marketing. The demand for sales and marketing space, especially the last year, has gone up dramatically because these kind of new space companies that we're talking about, the people that start these companies and create them are, PhDs. They're brilliant minds, these world-class engineers and technologists that build these companies, but they don't really have that kind of business/commercial acumen side, they don't have that kind of sales and marketing approach that some of you may have. You've got a bit of creativity about you. Sales or marketing is something that you could get into, and it'd be great. More than likely those positions will be remote as well, so it doesn't really matter where in the world you are. You could probably get a sales job for a European space company and still live here in the UK. The stuff outside of sales and marketing, logistics and distribution, I would say, or procurement and supply chain, which are kind of similar, but it's basically all about dealing with suppliers into that space company. So you'll be kind of, negotiating and things with suppliers that may supply. So if you've got a space company, for example, that builds entire spacecraft, they might deal with 5 different suppliers that give them all the different components that build the system to make that spacecraft. So they might have a supplier for their metal parts, they might have a supplier for their hydraulic parts. And in that procurement supply chain, your job would be to be the kind of the middle person between that supply chain and those suppliers and the space company that you'd be working for. So I think within a language degree, I'd say sales and marketing, logistics and distribution, and procurement and supply chain for that. Cool. Next question. So what country should I study in if I want to get into the sector? So a lot of this does come down to what you want to do, I think. If it is a technical side you want to do, engineering, technology, or if you just want to do commercial, if you want to do something that's commercial and outside of the sector, doesn't really matter where you study. But in the same breath, the obvious one here, okay, there's plenty of great schools in the UK, plenty of great schools and university in Western Europe. But, without a doubt here, for obvious reasons, the best location to get into the space sector would be the US. That's goes without saying. You've got all the not all, but over half of the market cap out there. So US would definitely be the best destination. But again, like I said, there's plenty of amazing schools, and you saw the organizations that we went through as well in the slide before that you can get into as well. So, but I think if you were to, pin me down on one location, without doubt the US, and I think it'd be a great, living experience as well if you graduate from university, or even if you want to apply to get into university over there. Be quite I'd imagine a lengthy visa process, but without a doubt, US probably would be the best destination for the space sector. Okay, so I think this is the final question, unless Catherine had any more for me. The last question I've got here is, other than qualifications and experience, is there anything else I could do to help me get into the space sector? So yes, definitely. There's loads of things you can do. The main one is networking. So with all those organizations that we mentioned in the slide, have a look at those, attend space related events. Most of these space related events are really, and this kind of goes in line with the type of culture of the overall sector, but they're very, very inclusive. So what I mean by that is, it's like, if you're not from the space sector, you're not coming in, you're not attending, there's plenty of events that you could attend just to build your knowledge. Just sit there, listen, learn, watch. and grow your knowledge of the space sector, both in person and virtually. Things are starting to open up a bit now, thank God. So there might be some, socially distanced events that you can go to attend. There'll be plenty of Zoom stuff online that you can attend. You don't even need to have your camera on. You can just sit there and make notes and attend an online event. There'll be plenty. If you look in the right places, just go on Google and look at those organizations, you'll find loads of events. But if you are serious about getting into the sector, I don't know if any of you guys use LinkedIn right now, maybe not, might be something you use later on in life, but it's an amazing tool. It's an amazing network tool, a great, professional platform where if you kind of take your time and think about it and do your research about, if you pick a part of the sector that interests you, or maybe you don't even have a part yet, but you just want to find out more about the space sector, try and identify mentors, sort out these people that you think would be of use to speak to. There's no such thing as a wasted coffee. Don't feel as though you're, wasting anybody's time. These people that are in the space sector are all passionate about the space sector. So they will have no problem about sitting there and talking to you about space all day long. But again, in the same breath, if you're attending these events virtually and physically, you're going to meet people there as well. Meet people, talk to people and network. But like I say, attend the space related events, do your research and try to identify mentors within the sector that you can speak to. Maybe even start with asking, your parents, your friends' parents, your uncles, your aunties, whatever, because you never know. They might know someone who knows someone that already works in space. So it's like a friend of a family that you can just, pop around for a cup of tea and talk about the space sector. So I think start with that first, because that could get you a quick win, but then start to look at these different sort of space related events that you can attend as well. I think, just fine, unless you guys, Catherine and Rona, have anything to add. Everything that we've spoken about today, there are links on our website. So if you go to our website, evona.com, on the blog section, so news and blog, I think it is on the website, there's kind of a summary, if you like, of most of the stuff that we've discussed today. And there's loads of links in there. So there's literally links to pretty much most of the things that we've kind of discussed today as well. So
thank you, Richard. I do have a couple more questions in the chat.
Yeah.
So the first question is, the Chinese launched a rocket today. Do you work with or recruit across all continents?
No, we don't know. Most at the moment, no, we're only recruiting, like I say, US is about 80% of our client base at the moment. The remaining 20% is spread between the UK and Western Europe.
Oh, cool. Some of the smaller companies sound like science fiction. Will they all succeed in this new marketplace?
Very, very good question. That's a great question. No, some of them won't succeed, unfortunately, and that's not being negative. It's just there are some. Now that space is so buoyant, it's growing so quickly, inevitably, this is always going to happen. You will get a cluster of new space companies that are trying to achieve the same thing. So right now, there's a hot area right now, and there's a company that has just gone public called AST in Science, and they've kind of beaten a lot of companies to the chase, really. They're kind of the next SpaceX, in my opinion. They've successfully launched a constellation of satellites to successfully connect the world globally. So they've partnered with Vodafone, but they had between 5 and 7 startup companies on their tail that were doing the same thing. They were trying to do that same thing, but they've just got there now. They've done it. They've got the investment, they've hired, they've got the people, they've built the satellites, they've got them up there, and they've successfully connected the world globally, which is fantastic. And it might not sound a lot, but what that essentially means is that wherever you are in the world, when that platform, when that data goes live, you will always have coverage. And the reason why they did that is the passion. They didn't want anybody to be in a position where they were seriously injured, or they were in trouble, and they could have got help, where it's medical assistance, whatever it is, but they didn't have data. They didn't have connection on their phone to do it. So this company is going to connect the world globally. So whether you're stranded out in sea or in the Sahara Desert or at the top of Mount Everest, you will always have a connection on your phone to be able to talk and connect with people.
Oh, amazing. There are some spots, even just like down the road, just like, oh, I'm between two buildings, I have no signal. I'm not even like anywhere stranded. That is it. Final question. How did you get into your job?
So when I left, I did business studies at college. I always knew I wanted to get into business. My dad was always a successful businessman from a young age, and I kind of I idolized him from a young age. So he was more into so actually the procurement that we spoke about earlier, the supply chain procurement, he kind of found his calling in the business world. And I knew I wanted to get into the business world, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. But I always kind of knew I had a kind of natural sales ability, a good communicator, natural sales ability. So I went and did business studies at college. My first job out of college, I got into doing sales, which was mainly for sort of insurance. And those sales jobs, like, there's nothing wrong with them. They're good sales jobs to kind of cut your teeth in the sales industry, but they're very kind of, you hit a glass ceiling. If you're a high performer, you hit a glass ceiling very quickly. So I was just kind of going through these companies and hitting the glass ceiling very quickly. And I always wanted the next best thing. And one of my best friends is actually now one of my co-founders, Ryan Hill. So he co-founded the business with me and Jack and Tom. He was in recruitment for a couple of years, and he said, if you really want to kind of push yourself, I think you should get into recruitment. So I went into recruitment just by just luck, really. He ended up actually working at the same company I did after I had joined. Tom and Jack were already there. So us four kind of together decided that we wanted to leave, but we all kind of had a joint passion for the space sector. Before we even decided to go into this, we had an interest in space exploration, going to the moon and all that kind of stuff. And when we set up EVONA and our own recruitment company, we really wanted to differentiate ourselves, but also do something that we were going to be super passionate about and was actually going to change the world. We wanted to do something that we knew was going to have an impact on the world. We didn't want to just go and do, recruit for engineers down the road or software developers at, a banking firm or something like this, which is very kind of common, very conventional. It's something we're passionate about in the space sector. We had a shared passion about. And here we are. We started recruiting in the UK when we first started back in 2018. And we very quickly branched over into Europe and then now into the US, but it will keep on going beyond that. Obviously the US right now is not slowing down. They're just an absolute steam train. But now, I think the next big space ecosystem, I'm going to predict it will be the UAE. Predominantly that's always been sort of oil and gas money. But there's a huge transition now over in the UAE where they want to sort of plug money and make that the kind of best space focal point globally. So I think the UAE will be the next hot market in the space sector. Okay, that is brilliant. Thank you very much. That is the end of my question list. No worries. Thank you. Right, let's stop recording.